What's up? Thank you for joining us for a special live conversation with the author of one of my favorite books, The Definitive Oral History of Emo. Where are your boys tonight? Mr. Chris Payne sitting right next to me, flew all the way from New York City to be with us today. How you doing, Chris?
I'm doing good, not too jet lagged. Thank you all so much for showing up. I'm Chris Payne, the author of Where Are Your Boys Tonight.
And who's this handsome fella next to you?
Hey, I'm Johnny Minardi from Feel About Ramen. Psyched to jump in on the conversation with you guys.
How did I rope you into this, Johnny?
A lot of begging, a lot of money.
Well, thank you for doing this, and thank you guys all for being here with us tonight. Let's get started. You guys can clap. That's why we have a studio audience, obviously. I feel like who was that presidential candidate? He's like, please clap.
Jeb Bush.
Yeah. There you go.
Let's not talk about Jeb Bush right now.
Don't ever make me feel like Jeb Bush again. So I know you guys have been sitting here for a while, and it's just been like a little bit, just like it's very quiet in here. But now we get to be loud, okay? So you guys can throw stuff at Johnny and have fun, and we're gonna have fun. But yeah, I think Johnny and I were both interviewed by Chris for this book, and I think now we want to take the chance to interview Chris a little bit about his experience writing it, and I'm very excited to do this. So thanks for joining us, Chris.
Absolutely. You were the first person, Johnny. I believe you were in the top 10.
Thanks.
So some of the early supporters of the book. This was my pandemic 2020 project that came to life, and it's pretty crazy to be sitting with you guys here right now, and all of you. So thank you so much for coming out. This should be pretty fun because I wrote this book about y'all and interviewed about 100 other 50 people about, what was Gabe Saporta like in 1999?
It's true, though. You got the right guy first because he just connects all of the rest of the dots here.
Yeah, I'm like at the beginning and at the end. It's crazy. It's weird, yeah. Let's actually, before we even jump into that, give us a little background on you, where you grew up, and like why you became passionate about this.
Yeah, so I grew up in a town called Colonia, New Jersey. In northern New Jersey, went to a big public high school. 02 to 06 was the years I was in high school, to give you all a little idea. And yeah, like this stuff was popping where I came from. Shout out to my buddy Greg Scalera from high school. He played in a band called Moraine. They were like big in the Jersey scene. He played keys in this band. They like headline shows at like venues like Hamilton Street Cafe and Bloomfield Avenue Cafe. These are like big like underground venues, like in the mid-aughts for like these Jersey scene bands. They opened for bands like Paramore and Gym Class Heroes, like big national bands that were touring through. And like they got to be friendly with them. So like my buddy Greg, like we would just be like, me and my friend group, like junior year of high school, we would just be hanging out at someone's house after school playing Guitar Hero. And Greg had gotten to be friends with Paramore from just touring with them. So we'd be playing Guitar Hero and he would just be like, oh, Haley's calling me. And we would just be like, oh, Greg's talking to Haley again. And it's like crazy. It's like, that's nuts. Like when you see your friends like having that kind of success with something that doesn't involve like your parents stepping in and saying like, oh, let me sign the permission slip for you to go do this. So like the music scene really showed me that just like some kid could just like start doing this stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you're from Jersey because there's something very unique about Jersey that I think you kind of feel in the book, but maybe it's like Jersey is like the state, it's like the suburban state between two major cities, New York and Philly. So a lot of bands on their off days would like look for a show to take place. And that's why your friend's local band got to play with Paramore because, agents are just like, oh, I need a show in between New York and Philly. And then you end up doing these bigger shows. But it's the most densely populated state in the Union. So, you could drive 30 miles, 40 miles, and it's a totally different scene. So if you're in a local band, you could play a show every weekend for different kids. Was that kind of your experience growing up?
Yeah, it was always like kind of a mixed bag with these shows, what you were going to get. Like one show, like the show that my buddy's band played with Gym Class, that was a show at the Stone Pony. The headliner was this band called Emery, who were like this post-hardcore band who were on Tooth and Nail Records. My buddy's band, the opener, they sounded like Get Up Kids meets like Hello Goodbye. Gym Class Heroes, like a scene hip hop band, was in the middle of the show, and another band called Gatsby's American Dream, who were kind of like proggy. Yeah, so it was just like seeing these lineups. It was like, this is so cool. Holy shit, Yeah.
Okay, so how'd you get from Jersey to writing? And I mean, tell us where you went from there.
Yeah, so there was a newspaper called the Home News Tribune in Central Jersey back then, and they had a teen page called Teen Scene, which was a very prophetic title to name a weekly weekly section in this paper that like high schoolers like me were gonna write for. So like shout out to my mom for getting me out of the house and convincing me to go write for it, because I was like a kind of kid who was like in honors English and AP classes and like into like shit like writing for the school newspaper. Well, actually I didn't do the school newspaper because I thought it was lame, but I wanted to do this because I could write about shows and like talk to bands and stuff. So I got my start like writing about music for that. I went to TCNJ, the College of New Jersey, and was the music director of their radio station. College radio is awesome, really important. That also helped me get my start. I met my buddy Jason Lipschutz, who's an editor at Billboard. We shared, we lived together, got to be friends. He was another person at the radio station. I was, buds with him when he was interning there and got brought on staff. So I interned too, and kind of went from there. I was at Billboard for 7 years, from 2013 to 2020, as a staff writer.
And you were like the scene staff writer.
Yeah, the grown-up scene staff writer. Yeah, so like that was how I. Do you remember? I was gonna say, do you remember the first thing I interviewed?
I know exactly how we met because
what was it?
It was for Tag. Oh, no, time out. Okay, no, hold on. No. This is what I wanted to say. So my experience is, when I was in a band, I was always doing interviews. And, like, you have a schedule. Like, oh, you're talking to this person. And, like, you don't think about it. And then I got out of being in a band, and I'm like, oh, I have a record company, and I'm like, want to get some press on it. And all of a sudden, I got to be like, oh, who wrote about me back in the day? And I saw Chris had written about me. I'm like, oh, let me hit him up. So I hit him up, and I looked at your Twitter. I found your Twitter, and I saw that your Twitter was C Payne on a plane. So I figured, I'm like, oh, I mean, if that's still his Twitter handle,
Oh, shit.
he must still like me a little bit.
That's great.
Yeah, I made that was my AIM screen name. I remember just like. I changed my screen. I was like, I need something new, because like how if you guys were around then, you know how it was. You wouldn't just have like the same MySpace name or the same screen name for like years and years. You had to change it up. So I was just like, oh, everyone called, because my name's Chris Payne, and it was like 2006. Everyone just called me C Payne. So I was just like, oh, and it was like right when everyone was talking about snakes on a plane. So I was just like, oh, C Payne on a plane. And
Dude, I never put that together until
Really?
right this
Hello?
second. Literally, I'd never put that together, the snakes on a plane part. But thanks for that.
Yeah.
That's great.
So it was the first time we talked. It was Cobra was premiering "Never Been in Love," the collab with Iconopop.
Oh,
that was
wow.
the first time we chatted.
That's the first time we ever chatted?
Yep.
Okay. So towards the end of Cobras.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also did the exclusive interview when Cobra broke up.
Really?
Yeah.
So I talked
Shout
to
out
you?
to Nadine at Crush.
Nice.
Wait, but you talked to me
Yeah.
about Cobras breaking up?
Yeah.
So, right, because you had written about, right, I remember, like, I don't remember, like.
Come on
like,
now. Block it out.
Yeah. But, okay, so, but did we stay in touch after that?
Yeah.
I think so, yeah. Okay, yeah. But that was like the end. And then, right, and then when I hit you up, I'm like, hey, I want to get a press piece on Tag. And you're like, cool, let's figure something out. And you did that story about Tag that was in Billboard. And then shortly after that, you're like, hey, I have this idea for this book, right? So talk to us from there. What happened there? So you're working at Billboard. You have this idea.
Yeah, so once I started to like get my footing at Billboard, I was kind of like their rock person. I did a podcast like interviewing indie and alternative artists. I was like, because Billboard's like an industry-centric magazine publication, I was like the indie industry sort of person. And once I started writing bigger pieces, I did a couple oral histories. One was on the first Panic at the Disco album, Fever You Can't Sweat Out, the 10-year anniversary of that in 2015. And the other one was the year the Warped Tour was ending. I did an oral history of the 2005 Warped Tour because like that was the biggest year. All these like Fall Out Boy and MCR were on it. And I really loved doing those two pieces. They got a really great response. And I had this idea for a book about the whole era, tying it all together. But because I was a full-time staffer, I was already interviewing all these people for my job. The book didn't really work. So April 2020, Billboard unfortunately laid off a bunch of people. It was like COVID, budget cut kind of thing. I was one of the people laid off. So the day after I got laid off.
Best thing that ever happened to you.
Yes.
Yeah, shout out to Billboard for letting me off, because this book would not exist if they had kept me on. So you know how it is like.
Do you mean this book?
So that was like such a chaotic time, just like so much sadness in the world, so many people like obviously getting sick, so many people like with uncertainty. So on the flip side of that, I think there was just like a lot of people like, spreading a lot of positivity, helping out one another online. And Pete Wentz must have seen like a post of like a bunch of these like Billboard people got laid off, because the day after I got laid off, I'm just going into my email, and there's like tons of people like reaching out and like being friendly and like, hey, I'll like be on the lookout for a job if I see anything, like that kind of stuff. So it's just like this crazy moment of like, I'm so sad I've been like laid off from the job I've had that I really enjoyed for 7 years, and like all this kindness of people reaching out. And I see this email in my email box, and it's just like, hey man, and I see the sender is Pete Wentz. I'm like, what? Because like I had interviewed him a bunch of times at Billboard, but we had never conversed that way. It was always through a publicist, through a manager. It was never like that. It was never him just like emailing me.
Right? Didn't you ask me if that was really his email address?
Yeah. So I was like, he was basically like saying, hey man, I saw like the news. Sorry, like you know, we should work on something sometime. So I was like, man, is someone fucking with me? So I just like, I called up Gabe. I was like, yo, I got laid off. You were like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I was like, no, yeah. But what I really want to know is this really Pete? Is this Pete? You're like, read me the email address, and I did. And you're like, yeah, that's Pete. So long story short, I was like, hey, yeah, I would like love to work on something. I have this book idea. Would you be into chatting with me for this? So like, long story short, Pete was really generous with his time. We chatted 4 different times for the book, and he gave a lot of really great stuff. A lot of stuff he hadn't talked about before. So.
That's awesome. So take us through the process of actually making the book, and like from the beginning, what are the challenges? Like also like doing an oral history versus like writing about it in your voice. Like, one thing that I thought was amazing about the book is that you took this oral history, but you were able to weave this thread from the beginning in the VFWs to all the way to TRL, and it was seamless, And I think that's a big challenge, taking different people's conversations. Like, how do you actually do that? What are the mechanics of that?
Yeah, so in a way, just because I always obsessed over this stuff for so long, a lot of it like kind of just existed in my head. Like it always kind of just fascinated me how these bands that got so famous started off playing in basements and VFW halls, and like, I missed like that like New Brunswick basement scene by a couple years that Thursday in Midtown came up in. But like I think for a lot of kids, the stuff that came just before you that you just missed out on is like kind of the most interesting, because you just missed it. It's kind of like tantalizing. So like this narrative did always kind of exist in my head, where I was like, oh yeah, it totally starts with like Jeff Rickley's basement, and then like the MCR guys are there, and then like MCR forms, and then like they become friends with Pete, and then Pete finds My Chemical Romance, or Pete finds Panic at the Disco, and around the same time, Fueled by Science, Paramore, and like it's all coming together. So it was kind of in my head. I think there's 35 or 38 chapters in the book. In my proposal, it had 72 chapters. Wow. So like it wasn't all there at first. I had to trim it down a lot, but I spent 2020 to 2022 just talking to emo people and went from there.
That's awesome. Yeah, even on the through line with the like Jersey stuff into like the rest, it's like it did all really, that big moments all started in Jersey, and you did a great job of like not making it feel just a Jersey book, which I think a lot of this stuff kind of unfortunately sits in, and then you've expanded it really well throughout all the other parts of it. And it's like, what was the main first Jersey things that you went up? I know your friend's band, but like what were the bands that you were like a lifer in the scene right away because you found these bands and saw them early and then saw them just explode?
So when I first got into it in Jersey, like I said, 02 to 06 are my years in high school. Thursday had already happened.
Right.
It was like the beginning of the full collapse era. So the beginning of the World at the Time era. Full Collapse had already gotten them big on Victory Records, had already gotten them signed to Islands, already got them hyped as like the next Nirvana, all that stuff. The bands that were like the big Jersey hype bands when I first got into the scene were Armor for Sleep, definitely MCR, Senses Fail, that generation of bands. So bands that were like putting out their first album in 02 and 03, kind of coming off of the momentum that Thursday in Midtown had started.
It's awesome. When you were making the book, who was the hardest person to get as an interview?
Who I actually spoke to?
Was it Mikey?
It was Mikey.
It was Mikey. we wore him down.
Shout out to Mikey, though.
Yeah,
he was so generous with his time. I can tell the story now. The first time I interviewed Mikey for the book, we chatted. We had a few different interviews where the quotes that Mikey gave for the book came out of. I think 4 different conversations. The first one, for some reason, this was the time that worked for him. It was 6 a.m. my time, 5 a.m. his time when he was flying out of Nashville to go to L.A. for MCR practice for their first round of comeback shows. So this is 2021 or early 2022, and I remember he called me and he was getting in an Uber and he was like, I was about to ask a question. He was like, "Yo, could we like keep it like really kind of vague and general for the first 10 minutes because the guy in the Uber, I just saw him, he's got like gauges and like he's gonna know what's up." So it's like, can we keep it light at first? So we had to wait until he was like about to like go through the TSA where it was like, all right, now we could like actually talk about real things.
What are some of your favorite moments from the book?
What was most fun? Just you asking me that now, what felt most fun, most magical was some of the stuff I was at. Getting to revisit it, it's because it's so validating when something that you experienced with your friends as a kid and you're like, wow, this had such an impact that like someone's paying me to write about this. And like, and obviously not just that, but having the opportunity to write about it. One that sticks out is the first tour that Panic did when they were opening the Nintendo Fusion Tour with Fall Out Boy in 2005 in the fall. Lineup was Fall Out Boy headlining. Before them, it was the starting line. Before them, it was Motion City. It was Boys Night Out and then Panic opening, first of 5. Crazy tour. It was like just at the beginning of Panic's crazy rise where it was around the day that Fever You Can't Sweat Out, their first album, dropped. So they were kind of this nobody band who just like people who were super online Fall Out Boy fans maybe knew who they were from like talking shit about the demos or something. But the last day of the tour happened to be in New Jersey. And it was at this really random-ass venue called the Rataco Center, like this bougie high school that had like this mini arena where their sports teams played because they had to up the show from the original venue just because the tour was too wild, just like too many tickets were being sold. And Fall Out Boy pranked Panic at the Disco. And because it was like a big thing doing pranks back then, which Gabe, maybe you've heard about that.
That's a chapter in your book.
Yeah. So the prank of Midtown wound up sort of breaking up Midtown. So by the time they got to Panic, they were a little bit nicer. So Panic just like they were walking out to this like very like dramatic orchestral music to play into I think it was Only Difference was the first track that they were playing on that set list. But they switched it out and played Backstreet Boys, Backstreet's Back. But they thought it would be like embarrassing for them, but like little did they know that the kids in the crowd the kids were young enough that they were just like, oh, Backstreet Boys is like actually awesome. I loved that when I was in middle school. So I just remember like the crowd like going crazy for that, but they're like the band being confused. And then like after another song, then Fall Out Boy came out and we're just like swirling toilet paper around like the Panic guys in their like frilly suits and shit and like hitting them with things. I was just like, what is going on here? And like with my friends, it was just like this crazy moment. And like interviewing like Spencer from Panic about that, interviewing like P and like Patrick was like the nice guy who wouldn't get involved with the pranks. So like like interviewing all the people who were there for that moment, like stuff that I was at, kind of just getting to like go back in time to like 16-year-old me. That was like really, really cool.
That's awesome. Did you catch any of the end of like the skate and surf eras?
Yeah. The last year it was at Asbury. I was there. That year was wild.
Which was probably what, like 2004?
05.
That was the last skate and surf. Yeah, and then it turned Bamboozle at that point.
Yeah, like there was a schedule you got handed,
Right.
but because every venue was overfull. Like I remember Seosin was like the big hype band that me and all my friends wanted to see, but like they were supposed to be in like the Wonder Bar or something, and it was just, there's like, oh, it's clear, it's very clear that Seosin is not playing in the Wonder Bar right now because all these kids are obsessed with like the translating the name EP that they downloaded off LimeWire. Right.
Yeah, and it's also like the fire marshal kept shutting down the big room, so then everything else would be fucked up for the whole rest of the day, and that was just chaos. That's like those are the best festivals I've ever been to, for sure. The early skate and surf ones. At the convention center. Yeah, so it's unbelievable. That was like when it all happened. I felt like when I left there and went back to Chicago, and I would always be like, dude, you guys have no clue what's going on in Jersey. It's like the best thing in the world. And that's like kind of early internet where you kind of heard about the basement shows and that stuff, but then you saw that and it was like nuts.
We didn't have cameras on our phones back then.
That's right. You had sidekicks though.
Not yet.
I think you had. No, close.
I don't know. Close. Yeah. I think I had a Nokia.
Yeah, fair. Flip.
What did you learn in making this book? What did you learn about yourself as an author?
Man, I learned. I mean, I was just like, it was such a, like I was touching on about like the book, like the era. I mean, like you guys know what, like you guys all lived through 2020. Like you know what it was like. Being able to like just focus on one thing that I was really passionate about, that I knew I could just kind of like not have to like deal with whatever else was going on, and just like be super focused on one project, and like having that light at the end of the tunnel. That was really rewarding for me. Some stuff that I learned about the subject matter. I'll start off with like a more serious thing. Like there's a quote from Buddy Nielsen from Senses Fail that really sticks out, where he was telling me like, yeah, back then with like the people would act with like the emo music, act like, oh yeah, they're just like putting it on, like the lyrics, like the front people of the bands, like, and he was like, no, like it was like real shit that most of these bands, at least like that generation of them, that iteration of the scene, like whether it was like addiction, mental illness, like whatever heavy stuff that was like on their minds, that was like coming out in the lyrics. Some of it was a lot more obvious than others, but he was like, yeah, they were not putting it on. It was like very real. And something that really stuck out to me from the book, along with that, because like obviously like so much of this music is tied with mental health, drug addiction. Also, like what stuck out was like how young everybody was, and how so many of these bands going into this could not have been prepared for the level of stardom and expectations that their bands were met with. Because like we were saying, these were bands where they started off playing like VFW halls with like 6 other bands and like maybe making a few bucks off of it. And it was just like a fun thing to do, like as part of a local scene. Like it's like if you're like the 16-year-old kid who's like auditioning for The Voice or something, you at least know that there's a chance that like you might be a star. That's what you're trying for. But if you were a kid from one of these bands and then like all of a sudden your day is crazy and there's like all this opportunity to there's just people throwing alcohol at you to like, and that's like your way of dealing with like whatever like undiagnosed mental disorder you might have, or whatever is just going on with your life, whether it's an issue or not. Just like so many vulnerable kids before like so many discussions about like mental health and whatever else were had. I feel like it was just, a lot of this hasn't gone away, but it seems like it was just like such a like an earlier era where I think a lot of people just like weren't really prepared for what awaited them. On the flip side of that, like just how much money was being thrown around in this scene once it took off was something pretty crazy that came out in the research. On a more positive note, like some of the money that bands were making on Warped Tours in those years, one thing that maybe not your years in Warped Tour.
Damn.
Who wasn't making money on Warped Tour?
2005 and beyond.
Yeah, so
Really?
05 when I did that the oral history that I mentioned for Billboard, one thing that I got into was like asking bands like, yo, like how much were you like making merch money each night? Because like a few bands.
Oh, merch is different than what you're getting paid.
Yeah, totally. That's why I said merch.
Oh, okay, I didn't hear
Yeah,
that.
I know Kevin Lyman wasn't sending those big checks. But yeah, like it started with like someone told me like, yeah, like the record for a band making money on a date in Warped Tour was MCR made $60,000 in the Detroit area show in 05. And then like talking to like Buddy from Senses Fail or JT from Hawthorne Heights, them saying like, yeah, on a good night we were making like $30,000 a night. And because kids didn't have credit cards back then, or no one was paying with their phones, it was all cash. Everyone was paying in cash. So like these band members would have like $150,000 wadded in their backpack walking through like Times Square trying to find a bank they could drop it off.
Sounds about right. Yeah.
Or like when they did drop it off at a bank, people would look at them like are you like selling drugs? Like what's going on here?
I have a pretty funny story about that. So there was a lot. That's a really good call out. It's funny you think about that. But there was actually just a lot of cash back then. You used to have cash. And so like I always just like would keep some cash in cash and not deposit it, sometimes. And I just had some cash in my house. So I had like $20,000 in cash in my house. And when I moved from New York to LA, I literally put it in my backpack and went through TSA. and like I just remember like the guy up on my backpack and all this cash. And he's like looking at me like putting it back in. Like, I'm like, it's my cash.
What do you even say?
I'm like, what?
Yeah.
He didn't ask me anything. I'm
Yeah.
just like, it's my money. I don't know. Like, I'm not going across, I don't know. I mean, to pay taxes on that money. It's just, I happen to have it in cash.
That's great.
It's just, and now it's really weird to have cash. But back then it was like normal,
And it'd be like a 19-year-old kid going to a bank with $100,000. Like, what could they possibly think is going on?
No, for real. Like, actually finding banks and
Yeah.
depositing cash was, one time we had like, in England on a UK tour, someone smashed into our van, just grabbed all the cash, grabbed the backpack, had all the cash from the tour. That was it. It was like
Just starting over.
especially because when you're in the UK, it's like hard to deposit money and stuff. Yeah, it was harder back then. That's crazy. That's a very good call out.
Yeah, because so many of the places where Warped Tour happens, it wouldn't be, they wouldn't
Right.
have it at real venues. It would be like, I remember in Jersey, it would be like the Raceway. In Saraville, New Jersey, and probably once you got out into like Saskatchewan, because back then they went to so many places. There were so many dates on like those mid-aughts Warped Tours. I can only imagine like how close the nearest bank was in these random ass places. So you're just like, the bands that are making the money, they're just like collecting their wads and like maybe stashing it under those like big. That's what MCR did. Shout out to their merch seller Kate Truscott, who was one of the best interviewees for the book, who like got to be around MCR through all those years. And like she was saying how like how like in a trailer there's like the U-shaped cushion in the back of the trailer that like hugs like the back of the trailer. They just like lifted up the cushion and just filled it with cash because they had nowhere else to put all the cash from all like their like probably like their 10 different black t-shirts, their 10 different red t-shirts, the gloves with like the fingers cut off.
Yeah.
So you could look like Frank.
Yeah, and it's also like you didn't know. That's the first time they had that much money too. So you're playing these fields in random places, and then you're like, you don't want to go anywhere. And it's probably pretty cool to have that much cash until you learn your lesson of like that goes away too real quick when someone knows you have that cash. So I think that tour probably needed some extra security that year.
Dude, when you got a publisher, is that like getting signed when you're in a band?
Kind of.
Like, what was that experience like?
Yeah, going with Day Street was...
Who is Day Street, by the way? Is that
Street,
like the FBR to like a bigger Atlantic or something? Is that
Day Street is part of HarperCollins Publishers.
Yeah,
and
okay.
Their specialty is pop culture. So a lot of music books, a lot of sports books. Meet Me in the Bathroom, like the Strokes, NYC, Downtown, Oral History that inspired me a lot to write this was put out on Day Street. Around the time this came out, like a year before, they put out Dave Grohl's book, The Storyteller. They had put out the Kim Gordon book. So they're like super legit in the music pop culture space. Cool. So they were the publisher that I really, really wanted to go with, and they came with the best offer. And
how does it work? Do you have to do like showcases, or what's the vibe?
Man, I wish it was that glamorous.
It's also cool you're on the same label as Dave Grohl.
Yeah, that's fucking cool.
Yeah, so it's like writing the book proposal, which is basically just like a big, huge homework assignment. It's like
we talked before you did your book proposal, right?
Yeah. So shout out to my agent, Alyssa Rubin, who helped me through a lot of this. So kind of like
shout out Alyssa.
The agent comes before the publisher, and they help guide you through that process. And also, like from talking to a lot of other authors and people in like the book industry who I was friends with, who kind of guided me through this process. Shout out to my friend Amanda Dissinger, who's been a publicist in that space for a while. She helped me a ton with that. So I was just like asking these people, like, yeah, before I'm signed, like, am I allowed to like do interviews? Can I work on the book? And they were like, yeah. So I was like doing like, I interviewed like you, like Max Bemis from Say Anything, like Andrew McMahon, so many people. Like,
and it was always in oral history.
Yeah, always was going to be an oral history, just because I love reading oral history so much. So like Day Street Books, who put out the book, it was phenomenal working with them.
That's awesome. Very cool. I want to touch on one of the things that you talked about in terms of the mental illness stuff. Tell me a little bit more about what you think about that in terms of when you talk to all these artists and, how the scene dealt with mental illness.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that was said so many times was just like this was before people were talking about mental illness or mental health really, which like it was one of those things that was said so many times. I didn't want to repeat it to the point where it felt like a cliche, but it's so true. It just like so much is. I feel like around 2010, I think a lot of very important causes, mental illness included, they became much more like normalized or mainstreamed in discussion. But this was a few years before that happened. So like, you know, you had some really brave people like Max Bemis who like did this all press cover story talking about being bipolar and like his experience with that and like how that tied into like the making of Say Anything Is a Real Boy. So there was like some discussion of it, but I feel like so much of it was just like misunderstood, or it just wasn't something that was commonly spoken about among like young people back then. So so much of it was just like you didn't know, or like there were all these stigmas around it. And you know, just from speaking to so many different people and like knowing, like learning about these bands and like interviewing people, like so common, unfortunately, with just like so many people who are in this scene, so many of the songwriters of these bands, you know, it was a very prevalent thing, unfortunately. And it was an era where I think people were not prepared for the complexities of it.
And how do you think it's different now?
I mean, a lot of it is just that I think it's just like a lot more acceptable, and just like it's so much easier to have these discussions about it because like a lot of it's just been like normalized. I think that also, I think a lot of like the pressures on musicians that exacerbated these issues have been at least eased now. Not that they've gone away, but they've been eased. Where like some of these bands, they would play like 300 shows in a year. Or they would like be expected, like the singers of the band, they would be expected to like sing 10 nights in a row. Where like probably no one would expect an artist to do that now. Or like
yeah,
if
but I mean, those are. I think those are replaced by the pressures of social media.
Yeah,
in a lot of ways, you know. So now it's like you have like you can play 300 shows a year, but you don't necessarily know what every single person is thinking in the crowd, you know. And now it's like tons of comments and opinions and bullying and stuff online, and in a lot of ways, it's almost harder today. I feel like.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's new problems.
Yeah.
That make these things worse have popped up. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the always on concept too that's like probably so brutal. You don't get to go away and make a record for 9 months and quietly do it. I mean, very few bands do just because they've set that as the precedent with their fans. But it's like always that thing, and it's like now you have to be great at what you do musically, but you also have to be great. You have to be a social media expert too. So
Yeah,
it's like
dude.
you're right. It is just kind of a different set of that problem. Thankfully, there's probably a resource and people to help with a lot of that versus like hiding it and masking it. But yeah, you're right, Gabe. There is definitely a new balance of probably way hard times as well.
Yeah, I feel like mental illness is something so many people struggle with. I think that there is something very beautiful about being an artist and struggling with that. I think, like Max, like sharing that because it does help other people deal with it too. And I mean, even for myself, I know that like when I was like 25, I dealt with so many things that my peers that I went to high school with that weren't artists didn't deal with because they didn't have that outlet, to write. So I think in a lot of ways, not that it replaces therapy, but music is therapy for a lot of people. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and looking back on the book, I feel really grateful at the people who were so candid about their struggles, like people like Pete and Mikey, and so many Max, so many others.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Buddy Nielsen, I could go on and on.
Yeah, I mean, even the intro of "Is a Real Boy," it's like that's the first time you really hear someone kind of talking about therapy in a way. You know what I mean? Like having him on the record that way.
Yeah, and like I think that's such an important record for so many reasons, and like. Because I think it can like maybe get lost now how important it is just to kind of like normalize talking about that stuff, because it's to the point now where like I think some like therapy phrases have just kind of become cliches in culture and they're like a little overused and it's like, oh, come on. But like just tearing down barriers and just making it easier for people to talk about that, very important. One of many reasons why Say Anything Is a Real Boy. One of my top 5 albums of this book era.
Something else that you touched on that I want to come back to too is that, you were talking about how when someone does like American Idol or something or some kind of singing competition, they know that there's a chance they might be huge, right? And for a lot of these bands, they had no clue that they could even build this into a career, right? Let alone be huge. I feel like one of the things I noticed in the book is that there's definitely a difference between some of the bands that had no concept of this and some bands that definitely had their eye that this could go somewhere different. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I feel like your band was like the one that had an eye. I could go somewhere different.
Well, it's interesting because when I started, I didn't have that. And then, I mean, I think I talk about that. I told you about that, but I mean, we can talk about, this is about you today, but you know, I could definitely tell you about that because I know the moment where I had that realization. It was on the Fall Out Boy tour.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was when Midtown was ending and we were doing Fall Out Boy tour. It was
Friends
like,
and Family tour, FBR Friends and Family. You guys main support, gym class, and academy under you.
yes. And it was still like VFW halls, but
And
it was like 800
and
kids.
to take this to your grave. That was like
Yeah.
at the end of that.
And to take this to your grave.
And they were like starting to play like Sugar and Dance Dance.
Right.
Yes.
Early
yes.
versions.
Yeah. And, you know, for me, it was like, I always think of a generation of music as the 4 years in high school, you know, because by the time, you know, the kids who are freshmen, you know, by the time they're seniors, you know, or they graduate, they don't know the next kids, you know, so people can listen to totally different stuff. So Fall Out Boy was like a generation behind me. Pete and I were kind of the same age, but I think the rest of the guys were like 4 years younger. And I just remember that they were getting started as Midtown had already been doing it for 3.5 years. And Midtown was like, we'd done our first album, second album, sophomore slump, you know, and it was like, you get to a point where you see these other bands kind of like getting bigger and you feel like it's something that a lot of bands that, you know, you feel like they work hard and they start paving these roads and other bands just cruise down, you know, on the roads that they paved. And it's very easy to get jaded in that situation. And I just remember being on that tour and watching Fall Out Boy and I'm just like, oh, these guys are just having fun. Like they're doing it for the same reasons I started doing this also. I just got to reconnect with that, you know? And I think as soon as I reconnected with that, a lot of stuff opened up.
That's awesome. And
Yeah.
how can you say sophomore slump? That record smokes. I don't know.
I don't know. Living Well?
Yeah, fuck yeah.
It was still, those are still the days that like
Yeah.
bands were accused of like having a record that
Right.
sounds too slick.
Totally.
You know,
That's
like
crazy.
not a term people use anymore, but like it was like that record sounds slick, and it was
Yeah.
like it was a bad thing. You know,
I think that's my favorite Midtown record, so that's funny.
because you're slick, bro.
That's right.
Yeah, what you were saying about like the bands that come before that had no idea of like that stardom was a possibility, and then the bands that like kind of picked up on what they did. It makes me think of a quote that journalist Ian Cohen told me for the book that's in there. Shout out to Ian. He compared it to seasons of The Real World, where he was like, okay, so like the first season of The Real World, there had never been anything like this. So the cast members, like, they didn't really know how to act. So the show wound up being a hit, but like it wasn't until like a couple seasons later that there was this codified thing of like, oh, this is how someone who's a cast member on The Real World is expected to act. It was kind of like that for by the time like MCR and Fall Out Boy came around, there was kind of this set thing for like, oh, this is like a pathway for an emo band coming out of the post-hardcore scene to be popular, because like the Get Up Kids, Dashboard, you guys, you know, Jimmy Eat World had like a taste of that success. So like that template had kind of been given. But in like 1998, that pathway for being a band coming out of VFWs who's like a little bit popular with some potential to reach a bigger audience, it just didn't exist. So either bands didn't try, or they tried and they failed, or they tried and everyone hated them because the path didn't exist yet.
Yeah, like I feel like it's hard to figure out exactly where the line is, but you know, definitely the ends of the spectrum you can definitely tell. Like I feel like Lifetime are kind of like on one end of the spectrum where they had like no even desire to be huge. I think even in the book there's a quote where they loved that Pete was such a huge fan. They did a record on Decadence, but they didn't know it was connected to a major label, and it was like against their principles to have anything to do with a major label, right?
Well, yeah, they said they were told that it was totally independent, and then they were surprised when they saw like Atlantic on some.
Johnny, was that you? Did you sell them the dream?
I didn't lie, but I definitely remember the moments when they were figuring out parts of it, and then we ran it through like No Idea Distribution, which was like a small Gainesville thing, because it was really strange. And I don't think they knew the whole package of All the Way Up. But it was kind of at the time when it was starting to go all the way up too, because we weren't always with the Atlantic thing. It was definitely like growing into that, and that was right at the time. So there's actually, I'll cover Pete's ass. I don't know if Pete fully knew the whole scale of it yet either, because it was in the middle of all of that. That's like,
yeah, it didn't sound like they were blaming anybody in it.
Because like Panic came out before the Atlantic thing, and then that was like the final, like then the Atlantic thing happened right after.
Yeah, and I mean,
right
for me,
in it.
I think for all of us personally, I don't think there's, you know, we're beyond beyond the point. It's almost like an anachronism to talk about like major labels
Well,
today.
it's like the sellout thing.
like,
It's like
yeah.
when did that stop? Like what was
Right.
the era? What was like the first bands that was like, I don't even care about that anymore. I'm doing what I want.
I guess that's the question. Where is
Yeah.
that? Because we were talking about that. Like one of the first bands, like one of the predecessors before this whole scene was Face to Face.
Totally.
And they were on a major label, but they made a great record that we all kind of knew about, but they didn't kind of fit. We didn't know what scene they were a part of because they were on a major, you know?
Yeah.
Like when I was a kid, you'd buy records based on what label they were
The
on.
logos, yeah.
Yeah. What do you think about that? Where's the line? When did it stop? When
There were definitely pretensions and things that kids talked shit on, like my peers, like, you know, in like 03, 04. It really wasn't a major label, indie label thing. It was more like, it was just like all these signifiers, like, oh, what is this band that used to be heavy? Are they not heavy anymore? Like that was a thing that like.
is the record too slick?
Yes, yeah, it was another version of that.
But for Lifetime, it definitely was major bad, right? That's that old school mentality. You can't. That's like a system we don't want to be a part of.
For them in like that era, yeah. I think by 07, I mean when that album came out, I think it was just it wasn't. I don't remember it being like disliked critically. I just remember a more muted reception to it.
It's Johnny's favorite Lifetime record.
It's fucking awesome. It's a great record. Yeah, go back to it.
I'm gonna have to go back to it.
We need that streams. Let's get it up.
So when did it start to change? Like, who were the bands that were the first ones you feel like had the inkling that something bigger could happen?
I mean, aside from yours, I think Jeff Rickley is a very fascinating figure with this. Jeff Rickley, singer of Thursday, because, man, I mean, like I was just at one of his book events for his book Someone Who Isn't Me that came out, which is awesome. And just like from like listening to a lot of interviews with Jeff now and then, the way that guy consumes culture is so interesting. He's just like such a voracious reader and listener, and like he's into so much stuff. And like he's like working with a brand new indie press now with his book, and he's like super in tune with like, you know, indie publishing, and like still really in touch with like new cool like post-hardcore bands. But also I could tell from like interviewing him for the book that he understood what being on Island Records alongside like Jay-Z and Kanye in 2003, he like knew what that meant. He like saw like the big picture significance of like, yeah, looking back on this, it's going to be like pretty fucking cool that like I was signed by Jay-Z and was in like Def Jam meetings in 2003 when they were like, hey, what should be the next single off College Dropout? You know, like that kind of stuff. So Jeff, you know, being like such an organizer of this scene in like Jersey in the late 90s, I think he's like a really central figure. And I think you also just have to mention like Dashboard and Jimmy Eat World with like two of the first big breakthrough moments into the mainstream with this music, with Jimmy Eat World with The Middle being a huge pop single and Dashboard doing MTV Unplugged and winning a VMA in 2002.
One of my favorite parts of the book was the chapter, the first fancy tour bus to pull up at the Manville Elks Lodge. For many reasons. One is that I played that show, and I don't remember there being a tour bus there. So talk to us about that chapter and what happened, why that was an important moment in the scene.
Yeah, this is one of those chapters where I really wanted to come correct because this was before my time in the scene. And like, you know, for good reasons, people take this stuff seriously and they don't want to see like subculture misrepresented or misconstrued or whatever. So it was really important for me to like interview a lot of people who played the show, who were there in the crowd, people who organized the show. Benny Horowitz of Gaslight Anthem now.
The Low End Theory was his band before.
Yeah. And Ricky Saporta, your brother.
My brother.
Yeah.
Bomb Shelter. Shout out Bomb Shelter.
Yeah.
Put on all the cool shows in Jersey.
Yeah, it's insane. There's a photo of the flyer in the book, but it was the Saves the Day Through Being Cool release show. They didn't even headline.
My brother made that flyer
because the Get Up Kids were so big. The Get Up Kids were the headliner, touring behind Something to Write Home About. It was the Get Up Kids.
Something to Write Home About hadn't come out yet because the CDs were mailed to my house for that show. I got the Get Up Kids CDs and opened it and listened to it before the Get Up Kids even had their CD. So they were sent to my house, and I brought them for the show, so they had merch to sell.
You are the connective tissue between all of it. It just keeps proving itself.
So it was Get Up Kids Saves the Day at the drive-in, like a few months before Relationship of Command came out. 6 going on 7. Midtown, there was one more in there who I don't want to forget, who I don't want to leave off the
I gotta find the flyer. I gotta find the flyer. Where are the flyers? In the middle of the book?
Ultimate Fake Book. That was the other one.
Ultimate Fake Book, because they were on tour with the Get Up Kids. Here's the flyer.
Yeah.
That is Chris calling from Saves the Day on the flyer. But it was the Get Up Kids were headlining. And at the drive-in played, bro.
Is it
Did you say that
$5?
already?
Yeah,
Or how
insane.
much was it?
And Midtown's coming out of Chris's mouth. What?
How much was it? $5?
I think it was
I
8.
think it was.
The dollar is on the flyer.
Damn.
That was an expensive
Premium.
show. Ricky would get shit about that, about shows
Yeah,
being,
that's
being,
a lot of
being
money
$10.
at that
That's a lot of money.
But it's
back
6
then.
bands, though.
Dude, my
6
brother's
bands.
phone number is on this flyer. Literally, 973-912-7444.
Still works?
Whoa, I have 444 in my number today. That's weird. I thought about that today. That's crazy. And this is like when you couldn't get a domain yet. So it was like you put the whole thing / shows. It's crazy. 6 going on 7. I played that too. Did you say that?
Yeah.
That's awesome. So tell us about it. So what'd you do to get it right? Come correct on that.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like it was one of these big pivot points in the scene where like I literally just made it the title. Like there was never buses at these shows because bands toured in vans. Like Scotty Reddick's from the Strider, this Long Island band, he was telling me like, yeah, the thing back then was like those long vans with like the rows of seats. Mm-hmm. It was like, how new was yours? Like if yours was only probably like, only like 6 years old and like not too shitty, that was probably like, that would have been like the status thing. But like, yeah, so like the Get Up Kids, because they had signed to Vagrant Records and Rich Egan and Vagrant Records had money. And also it was like I was saying before, the touring schedules were grueling. So what Matt from the Get Up Kids kept stressing and Rich from Vagrant to kind of play it off was like it was about safety, which largely it was. There were obviously tons of bands playing those grueling schedules without the safety of a bus, but if you can afford it, I suppose why not? So yeah, they like. They would kind of be like, yeah, could you kind of like pull around? Don't come, like we don't want people to see this. Could you maybe like pull around the side?
Yeah, I didn't notice it at the show.
No,
if it was
they
there, I
worked
didn't
on
see it.
you.
Yeah.
But yeah, like apparently like people from the other band and just like the kids spilling out of the show were like going on the bus to like maybe drink a beer. And it seemed like one of these first moments of like, oh man, like there's like rock star shit happening.
Wow. That's awesome.
That's kind of the sellout threshold almost too. You had to hide the bus at that point still. We had the same thing in Fireside in Chicago. It was like Glassjaw pulled up. They did 2 nights there when they should have done like a way bigger venue. And I remember there being a bus and it was like odd. You like were in line. You're like, who the fuck has a bus here? And it was like a really weird moment where you're kind of testing the band in your head of like, did they blow up? Now I realize like tour support's a thing for a major label.
Was
I
that
don't think-
Roadrunner
dude, I don't
Records
think Vagrant
money?
was giving tour support at the time.
At that point,
You
I
think
think
so?
maybe because they were on Roadrunner at the time, which was
Get Up Kids? No.
No,
No,
I'm talking Glassjaw.
Glassjaw.
Yeah.
But yeah, Vagrant was different because their manager owned the label, so they were probably well treated at that point.
Right.
A lot of money coming in.
It's crazy that it was a Saves the Day record release show, but
Yeah.
Get Up Kids was the headline.
Yeah,
right.
But, in our mind, I remember back then, Get Up Kids was like the biggest thing. They were the definition of this emo revival
Yes.
thing. And what's crazy to me is that it just was going, and then it just kind of stopped. And I never understood that as a fan. Like, from doing this book, what do you think was the cause of that? And where do you see with other bands? Is there a theme about that you've taken away from that?
Yeah, so the years on the cover are 1999 to 2008. And for me, going back, playing the historian of this, there's no one year to put it on, but 2008 felt like the most fitting year for a few reasons. I mean, one of them was Fall Out Boy going on hiatus after Folie à Deux. A lot of it, though, was really just...
Cobra Starship started,
Hey.
so it's like, the team was
This
definitely
is
dead.
over. Yeah.
In a lot of ways, I took the approached the narrative of the book the way you would like a movie with like lead like MCR and Fall Out Boy were the two like leading roles, like the two protagonists, and like the two supporting big ones were Panic and Paramore. And following their trajectories, there was a big gap with MCR after Black Parade. Like, how do we follow this up? It was like years and years delayed, but until they put out Danger Days. So there was like a lull with MCR, and really just from being a kid back then, it felt like the same fervor around the scene. Like it like really wasn't the same kind of thing. And I really tried to like make sure and do my due diligence in talking to people in making the book that I wasn't just picking 08 because that was the year that like when I kind of noticed when I kind of dipped out and was like, yo, I'm gonna go listen to some indie rock.
Yeah,
But
I'm a Billboard writer now. I write about the whole indie world, not
no,
just the scene.
that was my college radio days when I was
Okay.
like getting pitchfork pilled. You know
College
what I mean?
as in lighting. Yeah. I know about that, dude.
But it was like kind of the era when I think there were just like so many bands who like right from the jump it would just be like rich kids who showed up with like really expensive gear and with like there wasn't like the same communal aspect as like the bring a can of soup for the food drive and get into like there. I think a lot of a lot of the socially progressive leftist elements of the scene had been stripped away, and it had just been it had become a lot more commercial. And no accident that I think a lot of like the really important emo revival bands like Tiger's Jaw and Algernon, they were all starting around that era because the genre was shifting in a big way.
It's awesome.
Sure.
What do you think, Johnny? What was the moment?
I don't know. I feel like you're spot on where like things change. I think people came into it watching the blueprint of people being successful and just tried to skip steps and cut corners to just get there faster. And if that didn't work, they would just, start a new band and do it again and do it again and do it again. So it's like, I think it shifted that way, but I wanted to piggyback it into saying like, we kind of started talking about this, like do you think that thing can ever happen again? The way that it was like as pure as that versus like, oh, now I've seen success in the genre. I just want that. That's the pinnacle of it versus the other part.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the great thing about the book is that you finished a book there in 2008 and then you jump to this epilogue. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not a writer myself, but yeah, it's a part at the end of the book that, it's the MCR show in 2019.
Yeah.
So tell us about that and then jump into like where we're going from here.
Yeah, that was the perfect way to end it. I mean, I hate to spoil the ending, but I feel like a lot of people have read the thing already who are here. But
also,
anyway,
this is a great book to just jump around on because it's oral history. You jump around, it's like it always just makes sense.
Yeah. So that MCR, their first reunion show at the Shrine in LA, late in 2019, back before the pandemic happened, when people still thought shows were going to happen in 2020. This was like their kickoff surprise show to kick off their whole tour. It was, the return of MCR. It was huge, They had built such a new fan base of kids who were too young to have been into it in the first run, who got into it through, like, Tumblr, through, like, the characters of Danger Days and stuff like that in the 2010s. So there was this new generation of kids who were just, like, so ready to experience MCR for the first time. And also so many people like you and Jeff Rickley and, like, Amy Fiedler, so many people from the early chapters of the book were there at this show, and obviously MCR.
Minardi?
Yeah,
I saw you there.
Yeah. I was hiding from you though.
If I knew you were there, I would have asked you about it.
Oh yeah,
but I didn't know. I should have asked.
That was an incredible open and set list too, by the way. Like they could have completely like kind of not phoned it in, but like it could have not been great, and it was, I thought, flawless. That's the best time I've ever seen them, by far.
Yeah, and I mean like I said, like in weaving the narrative of the book, I wanted to be accurate, but I also wanted, to make it kind of like a movie, to like really do up the narrative aspect, because I think with oral history and how important it is that all the characters know each other, to really make oral history the best it can be, that narrative aspect is like so important. And this was perfect because it was like bringing back so many of the important characters from the early chapters of the book at the very end in this like grand finale.
So yeah, I mean, there does seem to be like, that was probably the beginning of the reemergence of excitement for this world, this kind of music, and it seems to be bigger than ever now. And to Johnny's point, is like, is it going to happen again? Is it just nostalgia? What do you guys think?
I think it's a balance of both. I think the nostalgic factor is big. Look at when we were young, look at all that stuff. But also, I think new kids are finding it and figuring it out in their own way.
Right.
I think there's a lot of like inspiration that doesn't sound exactly like the ways, we were talking about this. A lot of the really big bands sounded nothing like the other ones, especially the ones that really broke through. No two sounded alike except Patrick and Brendan's voice. That's the only similarities between like the top 10 biggest bands that broke from the whole thing. So it's like, if someone can find their version of it and kind of has the same through line, or like, whatever made those bands special, if you can, everything's a little bit different between them, but they all toured together. They all played shows together. They have similar fan bases. I mean, everyone in this room probably likes every one of those bands for the most part, especially the big ones. So I don't know. I think it's the same, but different, especially the old bands coming forward still and like still being able to play these monster shows, and then having the young bands open it, see it, and be like, oh shit, the stuff I loved is now this big. I wonder what it's like for me to climb the ladder. And I think it's kind of digging in and figuring it out.
It's awesome. What do you think, Chris? Where does it go from here?
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like the underground of emo, like the screamo stuff, the stuff that's more in line with like early emo and like emo revival, Ben's like Awake But Still in Bed and like Oso Oso and like old like stuff from the 2010s and now, so much of the best stuff really feels firmly part of the underground and just like isn't really interested in playing the industry game.
Right, goes back to what we were talking about.
And then like there is like lots of cool stuff, like Meet Me at the Altar, for instance, who like there is very clear influence from like the mainstream stuff in like what they're doing. So like there's a lot of cool stuff, but it feels more divided, the mainstream and the underground. It feels more pronounced, and I feel like that probably has to do with just like how like subcultures now, there's no there's some monoculture. There's still like Taylor Swift and Beyonce, but like so much of what was monoculture in the aughts is gone now, and it's just like all subcultures. So also I think another thing is like with how much the deck has been shuffled in like the social media age, I think we got so used to like going by each decade of like, oh, like, the 60s was hippies, and the 70s was like punk and disco and hip hop starting, and the 80s was synthesizers, and the 90s was like grunge and Biggie and Tupac. Like we got used to like all these like each decade is a thing, where now I feel like it might not be like that anymore. I don't think like these patterns necessarily exist the way they used to.
I think that it's, we were talking about this before. I think that what really made that era unique was that all these bands spend so much time together. I think that the fact of being on the road 300 days a year, you get to become friends with people, develop relationships. And I think a lot of bands today, you can become big on the internet without having to spend time together. And I think at the end of the day, people still want to be a part of something, and they're still looking for that. And, we're just coming out of this COVID pandemic. Everyone's on their phones, whatever. But I think we're going to go back to a place where people are going to want community, and when you have that community in a group of musicians, it's going to reemerge.
Makes it good for oral histories.
That's my prediction.
That's right.
Yeah.
Gabe, I'm curious how the book made you feel when you read it after living all of it.
I just thought it was so cool. I mean, I was just so, first of all, I was very grateful to you that you documented this, because, I feel like sometimes I don't know if this is just some niche thing that we all kind of grew up in and we're like, whatever, or if it, and it became this kind of big thing. But sometimes when things are really big, I feel like the majority of people, they like the parts that are just like in the monoculture, right? The mainstream stuff. Like when something's really big, it's basically appealing to just a mass audience that's not that interested in going deep in some ways, right? So I was just really grateful that you went so deep on this thing, because it really does make you feel like you were there. Even for me, it just brought me back to these places, and I'm like, wow. And I'm even learning things about things that I experienced and just seeing from different perspectives. So I thought it was incredible. You did a great job.
So I got it all right.
Yeah.
Yes.
4 stars.
Score.
I'm going to give you a great Yelp review. How did you feel, Johnny?
Well, I texted you that night. I sent Gabe a very long
I don't
text.
remember your text,
Yeah,
Johnny.
I got to look at it again.
I got to look
we
at it.
text so often, he probably forgot. But I sent him a long thing that I was kind of like going through phases of it. Like I felt like it hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, this was so incredible. I'm glad it's documented, but it'll never be like this again. And it like made me feel almost old in a way. But then I was like, coming out of that funk, I was like inspired to like find the way to connect it in the modern world with the new, call it tools or internet or whatever, but then also create that space for young bands, young artists. And like me, I was never in bands. So like a space for like a fan to be able to grow into it and just like be the 5th member of something and be like, yeah, I'll drive you to all your tour dates and do your merch, like whatever. Yeah. And like, you just kind of become this thing that you want to be a part of something. And like, you'd come home and you'd be like, they're like, how was tour? Like, well, it canceled 80% of the shows, but it was fucking awesome. Like, It was like the coolest 2.5 weeks of my life. We played 4 shows, like, and you got to get to California and back. It was like, and then within the book too, like I learned so much about like the Jersey side of it. I didn't know Gabe tried out for Saves the Day. Like that's crazy to me. Like that's the whole world is different if that actually happens. You know what I mean? So
if I would have made it Saves the Day,
totally. Like I don't know what it is now. So it's kind of really like the butterfly effect there, But yeah, I thought it was just super cool. And again, I do appreciate it as well. Like going deep on those scenes that like from Chicago, me experiencing them, you only knew what people showed you, because it wasn't like this, like go live on Instagram thing. It was like Jeff Rickley was like the coolest fucking guy in the world. And he probably still is, but I'm just saying like to me, that dude was like a god when you heard fucking Full Collapse. It was like the craziest thing. So even him being on majors, I don't think he ever took the swing of like, I have to be a big band. He's just like, I'm just going to do my shit, sing about insane stuff on War all the time that like I'm sure when you turn that record in, they're probably like, "What the fuck do we do with this?" You
Right.
know? And it's like, and it's
Like,
like unbelievable.
Can we get our
album.
$1 million back?
Yeah, they're like, when do we? Yeah, right, totally. So no, I think it was really cool just to dive deep on all like the things that I maybe forgot or didn't know or what they told the whole picture of the things that I grew up loving too. So it's like, and again, it inspired me to like be like, how do we take that forward and pay it forward to like the next generation or provide the like blueprints to like hopefully continue that.
It's interesting that you're, Chicago and Jersey. I always said this. They
Yeah.
were like, in a way, like sister scenes. You know,
Totally.
there's something fertile about those areas.
Yeah.
Do you know that my first release before Midtown, I was in a band called Humble Beginnings.
Mhm.
The first release I had was a split 7-inch with a Chicago band,
What was the band?
Oblivion.
That's an awesome.
Do you remember that band?
Yeah, seen my fire
So
set a couple
yeah,
times.
so there was like before the emo scene, there was like this
Yeah.
pop punk revival that was
Yeah.
happening. That like when I was like 15, it was what was happening.
Small world.
It was very small. Yeah. So it just and from there,
Yeah.
that's really where Alkaline Trio came from. You know,
Yes.
I think it's in here, the 88 Fingers Louie show that I
Yeah.
did, because the band that I think opened that 88 Fingers Louie show was a band called Tuesday.
Yes.
Did we talk about this?
Dan's other band, yeah.
Did we talk about this in the book? I don't remember if this.
I
is
don't
in
know
the
if you
book or
said
not.
We've talked about this before. It's not in the book, but we've had this, and
Yeah,
I
yeah.
love Alkaline Trio, so I'm all for this discussion.
Yeah, because there was like a pop punk ska revival that happened, like predecessor to the emo thing. And there's a band from Chicago called Slapstick.
Yep.
And that's where Alkaline Trio came from, right? Because they split off and there's two bands that came from them. Tuesday was one of them.
Lawrence Arms.
And Lawrence Arms was the other one.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah. But Tuesday was Dan's band,
Yep.
right?
And
Yeah.
then Tuesday and Skiba, Dan and Ada Tuesday became Alkaline Trio.
Right.
Yeah.
What was Skiba doing?
He was in another band called the Traders,
Got it. Yeah.
but I don't think Tuesday was bigger.
Tuesday was awesome. That Freewheeling, that record's unbelievable.
Great album.
I still listen to it. Okay, totally off on a tangent.
Yeah.
So, Chris, what's next for you?
Just like freelancing now, just trying to like spread my wings and write about like all sorts of different stuff.
Going
Keep
back to writing about
emo.
indie?
Yeah, I'm gonna get pitchfork pilled again like it was 2008 and just like listen to nothing but Animal Collective, Merriweather Post Pavilion.
Sick. That's cool. Guys, any questions from the crowd? Like, I'm pretty talked out, so we can just stop if we want. But if anyone has questions, we did put up this little microphone here. If anybody wants to ask, going once, you don't have to. Going twice. I feel like PJ had a question. PJ from Armor for Sleep.
PJ,
is
throw
here.
it in.
Is PJ in the control booth? PJ, get your ass in here. Ladies and gentlemen. Is he coming?
Slowly, yes. He's
There
in.
he is. PJ DeSiegel from Armor for Sleep. Wow, special guest. Special guest, bro. I feel like I'm doing a talk show. Just
you're
a
doing
surprise
great.
guest coming out.
Oh, they almost got off without doing
What's up, bro? You want a mic? You
Sure.
want to sit in my seat?
No,
Okay, you good there?
Well, I think that it was a question or maybe a comment that I wanted someone's opinions on. Where, My Chem, I was on the 2005 Warped Tour when they were blowing up and people were going insane. It was like the Beatles at that Warped Tour, right? And then they got really big, and then they took some time off and it died down. And when everything kind of came back, they came back like monsters of rock and roll. And my question was like, how or why did you think that happened?
Yeah, from what I observed was because they just like Gerard, like obviously Gerard, but the whole band like built a world for those fans to exist in. So even when they were gone, their last album, Danger Days, which had all these characters and like very much like Black Parade, a concept album, but just wasn't as successful. That album, I think, was so big for what MCR is now because it brought all these new kids in who were younger than me, who missed MCR the first time. So while they were broken up, a lot of this was on Tumblr, but it was like very online. It was like getting into the characters of it and like dressing up as them. And like, I think because kids my age all like could like really own like, yeah, I was there for Black Parade, but like this gave like these young kids the chance to be like, yeah, but I'm the Danger Days fan. This be like, yeah, actually the old kids, they like missed the actually best album, even though it's not my favorite of theirs, but like it's good. So it like opens it up to this whole new generation of kids, and so much of it is just like the characters, the stories, just creating a world for these kids to live in. And yeah, what really sticks out for me is I remember when I was at Billboard, like I was like a news writer, and on the 10th anniversary of Black Parade, so this would have been sometime in 2016 in the fall, kids were like losing their minds online because like MCR was teasing something, and they were all convinced that it was MCR reuniting. But the news announcement was just like, hey, we're like re-releasing Black Parade with like bonus artwork, and kids were like losing their minds. So that was when, that was when I was like, okay, like, damn, like MCR, because when they did break up, it did feel like it was a big thing, but it was somewhat muted. Like looking back now, the moment when they broke up, and it was 2013, I believe, it wasn't this like massive thing that you would expect it to have been.
No,
it felt
didn't feel like anything.
yeah, it felt like the band still had their diehard fans, but the scene in its mainstream sense, like very, very much come and gone.
People
So
were over it.
yeah,
People were over that kind of music.
so
Everyone was getting into indie rock.
yeah, it was this
you,
multi-generational
bro.
thing of like, I mean, I think kids adopting a lot of like the looks, like the style, just like how like so much of the style was like very androgynous and like very welcoming to like lots of different kinds of people. Like, you know, MCR and their looks like tore down a lot of like gender roles and like looks and stuff like that. And the characters, there's just like so much to engage with, and I think it was all just so welcoming to so many kids, and like the scene in general, in a lot of ways.
You know, just listening to that interaction right now, do you feel like you're the unofficial or maybe official historian of the emo scene?
Oh God.
Do you feel like that?
I mean,
What's it feel like to you to have PJ from Armor for Sleep ask you questions about the scene?
yo,
Like we lived it, and we have to come to you to find out what happened.
Gabe was like our our slightly older brother at that time.
Yeah. I mean, you have better answers about this
I
stuff
mean,
than I do.
I hope my favorite Armor song is My Town, and I hope you like how I used it in the book, because I like tried to kind of weave it in a certain way with a quote Ben gave talking about the song, and like trying to like paint this picture of what it was like growing up in New Jersey in 01 and the scene then. Not sure where I'm going with that, but
I don't know, but the My
I
Town
get
music
the point.
video is like the coolest music video ever. I want to recreate that. Like that music video is unbelievable. It was such a good storyline. Ben always had amazing stories. He had this story for a book called The Rain Museum that never came out. Can you tell Ben to finish that fucking book?
Come
Ben.
up with the publisher.
Yeah. I mean, I think actually his publishing company is called Rain Museum.
Ben's doing a lot of things right now.
Yeah,
which you
not
probably
writing
know
books.
about.
Yeah.
But I will say one MCR anecdote was that Ben asked Mikey. You probably know this. Ben, actually Mikey was gonna be in Armor, and then so Ben was following up with him, and he's like, "Hey, like, what are you thinking?" He's like, "Oh man, I'm sorry, my brother's gonna do this thing. Like, I'm gonna stick with him on it."
Wow.
Hmm.
Smart move, Mikey.
Yeah.
All right, good to see you. Bye, PJ.
Yes.
And I think on that, we're done, right? Anything else, guys? Going once, going twice?
Any other questions? Comments? Thoughts?
I have
don't
a
know.
comment.
What?
I just want to say thank you so much for
Yes.
flying across the country to be here with us.
Of course.
Give it up for Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
The book, Where Are You Boys Tonight? Everybody knows it. Everybody loves it. If you haven't read it, read it.
Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank you all.
That was fun.